On a cold morning in 1997, the name Fellows entered the history books for the first time. It was not through bloodshed or violence, but through a courtroom battle that would redefine how Britain understood crime in the digital age. The case of R.V.I. Fellows, R.V. Arnold, forced judges to ask an unsettling question. Could images stored on a computer be treated as photographs under the law? In answering yes, the courts stretched old definitions to fit a new world, forever changing the way technology and justice would collide. 2 decades later, the same name returned to headlines in a far darker form. Mark Fellows, a professional hitman nicknamed the Iceman, carried out 2 of the most ruthless gangland murders in modern British history. From legal precedent to cold-blooded execution, the name Fellows became a chilling symbol of crime's ability to adapt and evolve. What links these 2 stories is not family, but fate, and the uneasy struggle between crime and justice. The 1990s were a decade of change. Britain was stepping into a new world shaped by technology, and the internet was no longer just an experiment for academics. It was spreading quickly into homes, schools, and workplaces. For many, this digital frontier felt exciting and full of promise. But behind the optimism, there were growing concerns about how this new space could also be used to commit crimes the old laws had never imagined. Child protection became one of the most urgent issues. For decades, the fight against child abuse focused on physical photographs, magazines, and underground networks. The law was written with those forms in mind, but as computers became more powerful, disturbing material could be stored, copied, and shared digitally. A single disk could hold hundreds of images, and a growing number of cases showed how offenders were exploiting this loophole. The law, however, still spoke the language of photographs and films. It had no words for computer files, CD-ROMs, or digital libraries. This gap created a serious problem for prosecutors. If someone possessed abusive material on a computer, could they be charged under the same laws as someone who held printed photographs? Some lawyers argued no, because the statute made no mention of digital images. Others insisted that the intention of the law was clear, even if the wording had not caught up with technology. By the mid-1990s, it was clear that the courts could no longer ignore the issue. Each year brought more cases where the evidence existed in digital form, and each one highlighted the same uncomfortable truth. The law was falling behind reality. The question was no longer whether these images caused harm. That was never in doubt. But whether the justice system had the tools to stop those responsible. The stage was set for a case that would force judges to rethink the very definition of a photograph, and in doing so, bring Britain's legal system into the digital age. The landmark case that would reshape Britain's legal approach to child protection began with 2 men, Alban Fellows and Stephen Arnold. They were not household names, nor were they part of any large criminal syndicate. Yet the actions they took in the mid-1990s exposed a hole in the law so wide that it risked undermining the entire fight against child abuse in the digital era. Alban Fellows was a computer enthusiast with enough technical knowledge to build and operate systems most people of his time could barely understand. Alongside him, Stephen Arnold shared the same willingness to exploit technology in ways the law had not yet anticipated. Together, they set up what came to be known as Archive, a digital library containing a vast collection of illegal images of children. This archive was not simply a private stash hidden away on a hard drive. It was designed to be accessed, copied, and distributed using CD-ROMs and computer files that could store far more material than traditional photographs or magazines ever could. For prosecutors, this presented a major challenge. The Protection of Children Act 1978 was written almost 2 decades earlier in a world where the main concern was printed photographs. It criminalized the making, distribution, and possession of indecent photographs of children. But could computer files be considered photographs? At the time, the statute made no reference to digital data. To many, Fellows and Arnold were taking advantage of a loophole, believing that by storing images in computer form, they might evade conviction under the existing law. When the case came before the courts, it was clear that this was no ordinary prosecution. The Crown argued that the spirit of the law had always been to protect children from exploitation, regardless of the format in which the images were kept. The defense, however, pressed the opposite point. They claimed that because Parliament had not explicitly mentioned computers in the legislation, Fellows and Arnold could not be found guilty of offenses that referred only to photographs and films. It was a stark clash between the letter of the law and its intended purpose. The material found within the archive left little doubt about the seriousness of the crimes. Thousands of indecent images were discovered, confirming that this was not a trivial test case, but a deliberate attempt to build a digital library of exploitation. The sheer scale of what was uncovered shocked investigators and made it clear that the emerging world of computer crime was not just a technical issue, it was a human one, with real victims behind every file. Ultimately, both Fellows and Arnold were convicted. The court ruled that digital images could indeed fall within the meaning of photographs under the Protection of Children Act. This decision set a critical precedent. Computer technology would not be allowed to provide a shield for those seeking to exploit children. In convicting them, the judges closed the loophole and signaled that the law would adapt to confront new forms of abuse. The convictions of Fellows and Arnold marked the first time British courts had to grapple with the definition of a photograph in the digital age. Their names may not have carried the weight of notorious gangland figures, but their trial forced the justice system to confront a problem that would only grow with the spread of the internet. In doing so, it laid the groundwork for how courts would interpret statutes in a world where technology was advancing faster than legislation could keep pace. The trial of Alban Fellows and Stephen Arnold quickly moved beyond the facts of their actions and into the heart of a much bigger legal debate. At stake was not only their guilt or innocence, but also how the law itself should be understood in an era of fast-changing technology. The central question was deceptively simple. What exactly counted as a photograph? When Parliament passed the Protection of Children Act in 1978, a photograph meant something tangible, an image developed on film, printed on paper, or stored in some visible form. Computers were not yet part of everyday life, and few could have imagined that a digital file, invisible to the naked eye, would one day carry the same weight as a printed picture. Fellows and Arnold relied heavily on this gap. Their defense argued that computer data were nothing more than strings of electronic code, incapable of being treated as photographs under the law. The Crown, however, took the opposite position. Prosecutors maintained that the intention of Parliament was clear: to criminalize indecent images of children in any form, regardless of whether technology had advanced beyond what lawmakers anticipated. If digital files were excluded simply because they were not mentioned in the statute, then the law's very purpose would be undermined. When the case reached the Court of Appeal in 1997, the judges faced a pivotal decision. They acknowledged that Parliament could not have foreseen the rapid growth of computer storage and the internet. Yet they also stressed that the courts had a duty to interpret the statute in a way that kept its protections effective. A digital image, they reasoned, was not separate from a photograph, but rather a modern means of storing one. Once displayed on a screen or printed, it revealed itself as exactly what it claimed to be: an image, no different in substance from a traditional photograph. This reasoning was more than a technical victory for prosecutors. It set a precedent that stretched the meaning of existing law to meet new challenges. The ruling declared that statutes should be read in light of their purpose, not frozen in the language of the past. By treating computer data as photographs, the court ensured that offenders could not exploit a loophole to escape responsibility. The judgment in R.V. Fellows, R.V. Arnold, marked a decisive step in the adaptation of British law to the digital world. It expanded the reach of the Protection of Children Act, signaling that technology would not shield those who sought to harm children. More broadly, It confirmed that the courts were willing to interpret legislation with flexibility, ensuring that justice could keep pace with innovation. For Fellows and Arnold, it meant conviction. For the legal system, it meant a new era where the definition of a photograph could no longer be confined to paper and film. The case of R.V. Fellows, R.V. Arnold, did more than settle a single dispute. It carved out a new path in English law. For the first time, judges confronted the reality that crimes were no longer confined to the physical world. Offenses that once relied on printed photographs could now be committed through computer files, stored invisibly on a hard drive, but no less harmful in their impact. The ruling set a clear precedent. By deciding that images stored on a computer could legally be treated as photographs, the courts ensured that offenders could not hide behind technicalities. It closed a dangerous loophole and sent a message. The law would adapt to meet the challenges of the digital age. This judgment also shaped the future of legislation. Parliament responded with later amendments to the Protection of Children Act, clarifying the language so that electronic images were fully recognized under the law. In effect, the case forced lawmakers to catch up with technology, acknowledging that child abuse could now be facilitated through digital networks as easily as through printed material. The implications stretched further than child protection. It marked one of the earliest acknowledgments that digital evidence had to be treated with the same seriousness as physical evidence. Courts could no longer dismiss computer data as secondary or less reliable. Instead, it became central to prosecutions in areas ranging from fraud to organized crime. In hindsight, the case stands as a turning point. It was a moment when the justice system recognized that technology was not just reshaping daily life, but also reshaping crime itself. Without this precedent, many early internet offenses might have slipped through the cracks. By broadening the legal definition of a photograph, the courts effectively future-proofed the law, ensuring that justice could not be outpaced by innovation. This ruling was not just about one trial. It was about the survival of law in a rapidly changing world. 2 decades after the legal world had wrestled with the name Fellows, it surfaced again in Britain's headlines. This time, however, the courtroom was not debating definitions or statutes. Instead, the country was staring at the bloody trail left by a hired gunman. Mark Fellows, better known by his chilling nickname, the Iceman, was no lawyer, no judge, and no legislator. He was a professional hitman operating deep within the criminal underworld of the Northwest. Cold, calculating, and ruthless, his name became synonymous with gangland executions. The contrast could not have been sharper. In 1997, Fellows represented a turning point in how the law adapted to technology. By 2015 and 2018, Fellows was a different kind of turning point altogether. A man whose violence exposed the brutal realities of organized crime in modern Britain. The shared surname was pure coincidence, yet the parallel was impossible to ignore. One Fellows had shaped the future of the justice system through legal interpretation. The other destroyed lives and terrorized communities through violence. From law books to gangland warfare, the story of Fellows shifted from the courtroom to the streets. And this time, the outcome would be written in blood. In the world of organized crime, few names carried as much weight in Greater Manchester as Paul Massey. To some, he was a ruthless enforcer who commanded fear and respect in equal measure. To others, he was a local figure who had grown out of the rough streets of Salford and turned his notoriety into influence. But in both cases, one thing was certain. Paul Massey was no ordinary criminal. He was known simply as Mr. Big. Massey's rise began in the 1980s and 1990s, when Salford was gripped by gang disputes and a booming drug economy. He made his name through violence and intimidation, quickly becoming a central player in the city's underworld. His reputation was not built on whispers alone. Court records, police surveillance, and rival accounts all painted the same picture. Massey was a man who could not be ignored. He had the charisma to draw people in, but also the ruthlessness to keep them in line. By the early 2000s, Massey's influence stretched far beyond Salford. He was seen as a mediator in disputes, someone who could settle conflicts where the law could not. Yet this authority came with enemies, and the cycle of retribution never stayed far behind. In 1999, he was jailed for a violent attack, proving that even Mr. Big could not escape the system entirely. Still, his release only reinforced his standing. For many in Salford, Massey's name was etched into the fabric of the city itself. That is why the events of July 2015 sent shockwaves across Britain. On a summer night, outside his own home in Clifton, Paul Massey was gunned down in a hail of bullets. The attack was brutal, calculated, and cold. It bore all the marks of a professional hit. The killing was not just the end of a man, but the end of an era. Police officers, politicians, and residents alike understood immediately what it meant. A war was underway. The murder of Salford's Mr. Big was not a random act of violence. It was a message. Whoever ordered it wanted the city to know that even the most feared gangster could be taken off the board. The name of Paul Massey would live on. But his death would open the door to even darker chapters. If Paul Massey was Salford's feared Mr. Big, then John Kinsella was his Liverpool counterpart in muscle and menace. Kinsella's reputation was forged not through charm or negotiation, but through sheer force. He was known as an enforcer, a man you called when persuasion failed and violence became the only language left. Kinsella had long-standing ties to Liverpool's underworld. He was connected to crime groups that moved drugs, settled disputes, and kept their power through intimidation. His name was linked to stories of protection rackets and high-level connections, and even in court records his past loomed large. In 2008, Kinsella had admitted his role in a robbery conspiracy, serving time in prison. But on the streets, his image as a man who could get things done remained intact. What set Kinsella apart was his reputation for loyalty. He stood beside Massey, acting as both friend and ally. Where Massey had authority, Kinsella had force, and together they represented a dangerous balance of influence across Salford and Liverpool. But when Massey was murdered in 2015, Kinsella knew the shadow of that killing would eventually reach him. That moment came on the morning of May 5, 2018. Kinsella was walking with his partner when he was ambushed in Rainhill, Merseyside. The attack was sudden and merciless. A gunman rode up on a bicycle, firing multiple shots with precision. Kinsella collapsed and died at the scene. It was a killing as clinical as it was brutal, a carbon copy of the professional hit that had ended Massey's life 3 years earlier. The parallels were chilling. Two men, both feared, both tied to organized crime, executed in calculated ambushes. For police and prosecutors, the link was clear. This was not random violence, but the work of a cold-blooded assassin. The murder of John Kinsella confirmed what many had feared since Massey's death. A new order was rising in the criminal underworld, one that operated with military precision and without hesitation. And at the heart of both killings, investigators began to trace the same name, the man they would soon call the Iceman. After the murders of Paul Massey in 2015 and John Kinsella in 2018, detectives faced immense pressure. Both men were high-profile underworld figures, and the killings were carried out with ruthless precision. Investigators suspected a professional hitman, but proving it was another matter. The crucial breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a Garmin fitness watch. Mark Fellows, known for his interest in cycling and running, had used the device to record his routes. Digital forensics revealed a chilling detail. Months before Kinsella's murder, Fellows had conducted what police called a dummy run. The route mirrored the exact escape path used during the killing. Detectives pieced this data together with CCTV footage, phone records, and surveillance. What emerged was a picture of a man who had carefully rehearsed his crimes. The evidence dismantled Fellows' image as a quiet, ordinary figure, exposing him as a calculated assassin who planned every move. In 2018, Fellows was arrested alongside Stephen Boyle, accused of acting as his lookout. Their trial at Liverpool Crown Court in 2019 captivated the public. Prosecutors described Fellows as a contract killer who executed his targets with military precision. The Garmin watch became the most damning piece of evidence. The jury convicted Fellows of both murders. He was handed a whole life order, ensuring he would never leave prison. Boyle received life with a minimum of 33 years. The case proved that even the most meticulous assassin could be undone by the smallest trace of technology. The story of two very different men who shared the same surname reveals a striking truth about crime and justice. In 1997, the case of R.V. Fellows, R.V. Arnold forced British law to confront the dangers of a digital world. For the first time, the courts had to decide how existing laws applied to computer files and images. That decision reshaped child protection legislation, proving that the law could adapt, even when technology moved faster than anyone expected. More than 20 years later, another Fellows made his mark, but in a darker way. Mark Fellows, nicknamed the Iceman, was not a figure of legal reform. He was a contract killer whose precision assassinations shocked the underworld. The murders of Paul Massey and John Kinsella changed the balance of power in Britain's gangs and left a chilling reminder of how far organized crime will go to protect its interests. Seen together, these two stories highlight the constant struggle between law and crime. One Fellows became a turning point for justice in the courtroom. The other Fellows became a symbol of violence in the streets. Different worlds, different outcomes, yet both shaped history in their own way. Crime never stands still. It evolves, adapting to new opportunities, whether through technology or brutal violence. The law often lags behind, but as these stories show, justice does catch up, sometimes through landmark rulings, sometimes through life sentences. In the end, the pursuit of justice always leaves its mark.